Hey guys, welcome back to our second part of our brake job DIY series. We've already done the front brake DIY on changing your rotors and brake pads, and now we're going to do the rear. In order to do the rear, you do have to have access to VAGCOM or OBD11, and that's just because you have to disengage your electronic parking brake in the back. If you don't have one of those two, there is a way to do it, and there's other videos on YouTube that show you how to disengage it without using one of those programs, but the easiest way possible is definitely OBD11 or VCDS. So get a hold of one of those if you want to do this job. Other than that, it should be a pretty simple, straightforward DIY. We're going to knock into it here, and if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, let us know, and we'll answer them as soon as we can. But a lot of this is going to be similar to the front brake DIY in terms of prep. Same thing, you know, get your car on jack stands, wheels off, put your wheels under the car for an added safety layer. Use jack stands always, no supporting the car just by the jack only. Make sure you undo your brake reservoir lid. We'll show you how to do that again in this video, and yeah, we're going to get to it. Okay, so before you start to actually remove anything, especially before you go to compress your pistons in your brake calipers, you want to remove the cap to your brake fluid reservoir. That way, when you're pushing the piston in, it doesn't create any undue pressure in here. We're going to undo this, then put some paper towels around it. That way, if any brake fluid comes out, then we will be able to catch it all up. So I'm going to remove the actual plug here first, set off to the side, undo this. I'm going to go set this on a paper towel and then pack some paper towels around it, and we'll be good to start. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do before we get started on anything else is disengage electronic parking brake. So we're going to turn the power on, but just the ACC power, not turn the actual car on. Let everything come up. Make sure we turn off our AC and all that good jazz. You hear that noise because my sensor for the brake fluid reservoir is disengaged, or I'm sorry, unplugged. So what we're going to do is we're going to cycle through the parking brake a couple times. We just want to turn it off and back on, and then turn it back off one more time. And now after that, we're going to connect our OBD11, and I'll do a screen recording to show you how to disengage the parking brake. So we are in the OBD11 app, and we're going to click the button on the bottom right, the little blue circles of the three lines, to go to our control units. And we're going to swing down here, and there should be a section that's just for the electronic parking brake. There it is, parking brake right there. Click on that, number 53. Let this load, and then we're going to go into basic settings. Let's see here. And we're going to hit start lining change mode, the second from the top. We're going to press that, and you should be able to hear the electronic parking brake recede. So we're going to hit that. We're going to hold the green button. Hopefully got that on mic. That was the sound of it reseating, and so now we are good to go and change the rotors and brake pads, and then when we're done, we'll have to come back into OBD11 and reset the parking brake, and I'll show you guys how to do that as well. All right, let's talk about the tools that we're going to need for this job other than VCDS or OBD11. This is actually a much easier job than the front brakes. This will take you about 20 minutes on each side once you got everything ready to go. We obviously need brake grease, some blue Loctite for reassembling the hardware. Even if you're replacing your hardware, I still recommend a little bit of blue Loctite. We need something to compress the brake caliper piston. 13mm socket on a socket wrench. I recommend a 3/8 inch drive. The 1/2 inch drive was a little bit big and bulky back there, so 3/8 will just do just fine. If you have a thin 15mm socket, 15mm wrench, then that'll work, but I just use needle nose pliers, and you'll see what I'm talking about. There's basically two bolts in the back that hold the caliper on. They're both 13mm, and then in front of that there is a 15mm nut inside this setup, and you'll see what I'm talking about once I start filming. But needle nose pliers do just fine to hold that 15mm nut in place while you loosen and tighten the rear bolts. You need T30 Torx for the set screw, a wire brush, or even better, a wire wheel if you have one for impact or for one of your drills. And then a hammer or mallet. Found that my little 3-pound mallet here worked a lot better than my hammer. My rear rotor on my passenger side was on pretty tight. And then some brake cleaner to clean up stuff. And that is pretty much it. It's not a very difficult process, and I'll show you guys what to do starting right now. All right, so I'm gonna try and do as most of this as I can in one take here. The first thing you wanna do as soon as you get your wheel off is you wanna get some PBR and blast the set screw. It's out of frame here, but you know what a set screw is if you're doing this job. Hit that in the very beginning, give it some time to soak in there so that set screw can come loose. Remember, they do get stuck on occasion. If it does get stuck, put your Torx or whatever in there, even just take a hammer and smack it a couple times to kind of shock it loose if you need to. Try not to strip that set screw. If you start to unscrew it and it shows signs of extreme resistance, do not keep going. It should only be torqued about 10 foot-pounds or less. And so if it's really in there, don't strip that screw out. Hit it with more PBR, maybe even hit it with some heat if you need to. So I've already got that in. I've got my lug bolt in there for when we remove the rotor. But the first thing we're going to do is remove the wear sensor, which is right there. And we're just going to pull this out. I'm going to use a set of needle nose. We're going to be replacing this sensor, so I'm not really worried about damaging it. It's kind of hard to see up here. I'm going to pull this sensor out of its holder here. Actually, I don't even think I need to. Let's see here. Well, we'll worry about that in a little bit when I can get more light on it and actually show you guys. But we're going to be replacing a sensor. You can see it connects right here, but it's a shadow. So next thing we're going to do is remove the upper and lower bolts that hold the caliper here. And when we get the caliper off, we're just going to be flipping it over and resting it on top. And what I'm going to do is adjust this camera so that you guys can see more stuff here. There we go. Try and keep my light here for you. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is just loosen. We're just gonna crack loose these 13 millimeter nuts, or I'm sorry, screws, bolts, whatever. They shouldn't be on there much. I think it's like 35 Newton meters. And you just wanna get them loose to where the whole assembly spins, because what you're gonna see when you try to loosen it is this bolt right here is gonna spin with it, you can see. That's where you either need a thin 15 millimeter wrench or use a set of needle nose pliers. And don't grab that soft rubber boot, just grab the metal nut there on the inside. You just gotta hold it in place and get a good grip on it here. And just loosen this up. Now these bolts are specific to which end they're on, and you'll see it's really obvious which one goes where. The larger one goes on the top, the smaller one goes on the bottom. And that is it. Now, when we undid this top carrier bolt, the actual connector that holds the wear sensor comes off with it, okay? So you can see it there. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab this little thing here, we're gonna rotate it. I think it's counterclockwise. We gotta rotate it some way. I'm gonna adjust the light and get a better view of that and show you how to replace it in a moment. For now, we're just gonna move it out of the way. So now we should be able to just lift the caliper off. There shouldn't be anything holding it on there because the brake pads stay in the carrier when this comes off. So we just grab here, kind of rock it a little bit. There we go, that comes off. And then be sure not to strain the brake line, and we can rest this right there. Okay, so there's no tension on the actual brake line over here. We've got that rested here. You can see this thing's got a bunch of rust and buildup in here, so it's well past time to replace these. The other thing we're gonna have to do is to compress this piston, but for now we're gonna go ahead and work on cleaning all this stuff up. So first thing is remove the old brake pads, and they just slide out like that from the rear and from the back. Now make note of which one is which. You see this is a solid line here. You see this one has a groove in it. That groove is for the wear sensor. So you know that your brake pad with the groove goes in here. There's only a wear sensor on the driver's side of the car. So you don't have to worry about a sensor on the other side, but just know that the one with the groove goes in the back of the rotor. those just push out. Once you get those pushed out, you just want to remove these metal brake pad guides that clip in there. They're old. You should have replacements with your brake pad kit. If not, make sure you don't lose these. You're going to clean them up and reuse them. And then after that, it's time to remove the actual rotor. We are not going to remove the carrier. You can actually remove and install the rotor without removing the carrier. So let me slide the camera back a little bit so you can see here. We're going to remove the set screw. Now, if yours starts to rotate, you can always put a screwdriver in right here and stop the wheel from rotating, but my set screw came out without any resistance at all. That PB Blaster really does a good job of getting it broken up. And then from there, we're gonna give the rotor a good whack. Make sure your caliper doesn't fall. May take a couple of times. Now, obviously, if you're not changing your rotor, you're not gonna have to deal with this. You just put in your new brake pads and put everything back together. There we go. So it's loose now. I'm gonna do the lug bolt. And then we can maneuver the rotor out. So from here, we are going to want to compress the piston on this. I got this fancy tool from Amazon, works really well. There is another even simpler tool that you can use that costs less, but this works for both front and back. Made it very, very simple. All right, once again on this, when you compress it, you want to compress it all the way back, but don't over tighten your piston. You'll feel it pushes back easy, 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 and then there'll be some resistance. Once you get to that resistance, stop compressing it, get the compressor out of there. You don't want it to go past this rubber boot here. Okay, now it's time to clean everything up here and prep everything to install and then put it back together. Okay, before we start to put anything back together, we want to prep everything and clean it up really good. So we're gonna use some brake clean and just clean up any surfaces that touch metal to metal. We're gonna spray the inside of the actual caliper. We'll probably take a brush to the piston, clean it up a little bit. But yeah, you wanna clean all that up, and then you really wanna clean up the mating surface where your rotor attaches to your wheel bearing hub here. I've got a good amount of rust. That's where that wheel on the drill is gonna come in really handy. So first thing I'm gonna do is just spray everything down, get it all cleaned up. I'm gonna take my brush here on the wheel and really clean this surface up. If you're using a wheel like that, be really careful not to hit the rubber boots here on your pins. Spray that off again, and we're gonna take our brush and just clean the inner side up here real good. Hit these one more time. All right, and then like I said, we're gonna clean up the actual brake caliper piston here. Be careful on the actual boot, you don't wanna damage it. Sorry, it's kinda hard to see that, isn't it? We're basically just scrubbing the inside of the actual caliper up here. All right, and the last thing we need to do before we start putting everything back together is replace the wear sensor. So let me rearrange the camera and light so that you can see how I do that. Okay, so to remove the wear pad sensor, you've got your mounting bracket. Remember, that goes between your caliper, like it goes between this bolt here that holds your caliper to the carrier. So on the back of this, there's this little hole there in the bracket, and it's kind of hard to see. I know my hand keeps getting in the way here, but there's a little black pin that comes through. Get something to push that out, and then you can rotate it to come out of this thing, and then it frees that up. Once you're here, it's just as simple as knowing how to undo a Volkswagen Audi electrical connector. If you don't know that, you are going to push them together, and then once they're pushed together, you're gonna press that little tab there down and pull them apart. Now these have a tendency here with all the road grime and stuff to get stuck, but this one came off pretty easy. So got that. We're gonna go ahead and grab the replacement one that came with the Akabono pads. We're gonna plug that back together until it clips, and we're going to put it back together on the mounting bracket. The same thing goes in and then rotates and locks in to that little piece there. So now that's ready to go. We can move this out of the way, and now we can do the next part, which is putting the rotor on. And we're gonna slide that into the carrier here. Just be really careful not to scratch it real bad. There's a coating on here that's gonna scratch a little bit, but it's not gonna put grooves into the actual rotor or anything. Just go slow, and you're gonna have to move it in here and then push it back. So we're gonna do that next. All right, so this is relatively straightforward here. You've got your new rotor. Now, these are not directional rotors. If you have directional rotors, then you wanna make sure that you have ensured the rotors you're putting on are facing the correct direction. Like I said, we're gonna easily come in here, get it into the carrier, and slowly maneuver it onto the hub. Once you have that, you need to find where your set screw is and go ahead and get that installed to hold the rotor in place. Do not cross thread your set screw. And then it torques down just to about 7 or 8 foot-pounds, nothing crazy, 10 Newton meters. All right, so we've got that on there. Obviously, before we install brake pads, we're gonna clean up any grease that may have gotten onto the rotor. But the next piece that we can do right now is to install these metal carriers, and these are your guides for your brake pads, okay? And so these literally just go right here, and they sit into these grooves. You just press them in. They really don't have much room for movement on either side. There's not an up or a down, so to speak. You can move your rotor to make sure that they spin freely. And now we're ready to go prep the brake pads and the screws to install everything back to the rotor. Now it's time to prep your brake pads and your bolt to reconnect your caliper to the carrier. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get some blue Loctite. I'm going to go my bolts. Remember, the small bolt here is your lower caliper to carrier bolt. Just get us some Loctite on there. Same thing with the upper bolt. And it's always a good idea to replace these if you want, although not really a necessity here, especially if you use Loctite. If you're not going to replace them, definitely use some blue Loctite. So, got that done. Next, we need to grease the back of the brake pads themselves. Now, when you do this, make sure that you don't get any grease on the actual pad face here. Obviously, grease and friction don't go well together when you're trying to stop a 4,200 pound car. So, just put a nice little line of the brake grease on there. And the other thing that you want to grease is the hooks here that actually connect in. They're not really hooks here, but you'll be able to see where they rest on the carrier. It's the one with the right angle. There's a right angle on one side and then a more obtuse angle. So you want to just lightly grease the inside of that where they're going to be resting. It's got this Kevlar pad on the back, and you can probably get away with just greasing that, but I'm just used to greasing the entire back of a brake pad, so I'm doing the whole thing. Okay, so once again, remember, when these go back on, there's a rear brake pad and a front. And when I say front, we're talking about the face of the rotor that you're looking at. When we say rear, we're talking about the back of the rotor that you can't really see. As you can see here, there's no groove here and there's a groove here in the middle. That's for your wear pad sensor. So that is going to go in the rear of the rotor. The one with no groove goes in the front face of it. Okay, so the one you'd be looking at when you put it on there. So we're gonna get all this moved over to the rotor and get prepped to put this in, and we'll show you how this all goes together. All right, first things first, let's put our new brake pads on. So the rear brake pad, it's easy, it just goes in there and slides in. Now we've got these metal guides here, and your wings, so to speak, off your brake pads go into those, and you just push them straight up against to your rotor. Now on this side, you kind of have to set the rotor or the brake pad in the carrier and then slide it in. So that's the first one we're gonna do. We're going to, once again, make sure you don't get any grease onto the actual brake pad. See how we kind of slide it in there first, and then get them lined up with the guide, and then just push them in, and that's it. On the rear, it's even easier because you don't have to deal with the bar of the carrier. You're just going to line it up with the actual carrier slide areas, whatever you want to call them, and push them in. All right, so we've got, let me get my mic here. We've got both of the brake pads on. So the next step is going to be realigning the caliper onto the carrier, and we got to make sure we feed the wear sensor through correctly so that it can plug into the rear brake pad. So your last couple steps here are to put the caliper back on, connect it, and reconnect your sensor for your wear harness or your wear sensor on the back pad. We've got this sensor pulled out of the way here, and we're going to leave it there until we get the actual caliper back on. So we're just going to take it. Remember, don't let any undue stress get onto, or any undue stress occur on the brake line. And we're going to just set this over your new brake pads. I should have probably worn some gloves because I forgot how filthy this is. And so those are on there. So now all we have to do is, first thing we have to do is get this bracket set back up here. And this bracket is going to go right there. It connects to the back of the caliper. Let me see if you can see that. You can kind of see that. Let me see if I can move this around. You can kind of see how it connects there. So we got that. Let me get this where you can keep seeing what I'm doing. All right, so now we've got our bolts that are ready to go with Loctite on them. I'm always going to start with the top bolt and get everything aligned. When we get this in there, we're just going to get this started. We're going to just do hand tight, and right now it's already starting to spin the 15mm nut, so I've got it started. That's all I care about. Now I'm going to go down here, get the rear lined up, and do the same thing, or the bottom bolt lined up, do the same thing. So those are all together. So now all I have to do is tighten these down. The torque setting for these is 35 Newton meters, so a little over 25 foot-pounds. I guess I can get that by hand first. Now once you get them to a certain tightness, you won't have to use the pliers anymore. It'll be tight enough that that inside 15mm nut will hold itself, which is right now. So you can use your torque wrench, but 25 pounds isn't terribly tight, or 35 Newton meters I should say. And that's it. So everything is back together. All you have to do now is connect put your wheels back on. After you get those bolts torqued down, your last step back here is to get your wear harness, or I'm sorry, your wear sensor, and plug it into the actual brake pad. And you use that groove there, so I can get a decent video here. You can see that groove, and this is just going to slide down over that groove. And you can see the little wire there that comes off that plastic. That, let me see if I can zoom in on it. That is your actual wear sensor. So you want that facing towards the actual brake, like the front of the brake pad. So that's in there. The wire is routed correctly. So the last step is to re-engage your electronic parking brake with OBD11, and I'll show you how to do that right now. Okay, so we're back in OBD11. Once again, you want to go down to your control units after you've got into the car and scroll down to your parking brake. Let's find it. Parking brake. Click on that, number 53. Let it load up, and then once it's loaded, we're going to go into basic settings. Sometimes this takes longer. There we go, basic settings. And then we're going to hit end lining change mode. Press and hold the check button, and you will hear the parking brake re-engage. All right, so once again, give your brake pedal a few presses. It'll feel soft at first, but as that piston re-engages the rear brakes, you'll feel it tighten up. And next, we're going to talk about bedding in the brakes correctly so that you get long-lasting life out of these rotors and out of the brake pads. And just a heads up, I'm just going to be copying what I recorded for the front brake DIY video. So if you've already seen that, you already know how to bed in the brakes. There's nothing different with this particular kit for the rear brakes versus the front brakes. So hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If it's helped you guys, please let me know in the comments below, like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next DIY. Quick note before we get into bedding the brakes. If you put everything back together, you re-engage your electronic parking brake, and for whatever reason on your dash you've got a brake like warning lamp, like a brake fault light or something, what you want to do is reset and set your parking brake a couple times, and then if you still have an issue, then go into your OBD11 or VCDS and just basically wipe all the brake fault codes and see if they come back. But after that, they shouldn't come back at all. You shouldn't have any issues. If you do that and you reset everything and you still have issues, then you need to go through and double check some things. Make sure your fluid level is correct in case you push some out of the brake fluid reservoir. But otherwise, you should be good to go. So here we go. Here's how to bed the brakes. Okay. Let's talk about the bed-in procedure. And real quick, if you can't tell, this is a really dirty job. So you're gonna wanna wear gloves and clothes that you don't care about messing up. So we're done. The next thing I have to do, and this procedure applies for the front and rear brakes. Keep in mind, all bed-in procedures are different depending on what rotors you buy, what brake pads you buy. These are the Akebono ceramic pads that come with the kit from FCP Euro. I called Akebono. They said there's no bed-in procedure for their pads, which is, I don't know if I believe them. I mean, they're the ones that make them, but they said there's no reason to. But on Zimmerman, they send you this nice little manual, and we're gonna skip to section 4. It says recommend running in. I'll just read this. You're gonna run in on sections of road that allow the following driving maneuvers to be performed safely and in accordance with traffic rules. So obviously Mexico, duh. When running in, coat Z coated brake disc, which is what these are. Kindly perform approximately 5 to 10 short and moderate braking operations for breaking off the coating layer. After that, kindly ensure a bedding in process of brake discs and brake pads. This process causes the brake disc the brake disc heats up gradually and serves to adapt the friction surfaces of the brake disc and the brake pad. Please avoid, if possible, during the first 300 kilometers, shock braking, which is strong and sudden brakings. If road conditions permit, perform several short, moderate braking actions without ABS intervention within the first 300 kilometers. Failure to observe the recommended running in procedure may result in impairment of the brake function and worse brake performance. So, once you get this all done, basically they're saying don't go wild on this. You want to take this out, find a stretch of road that you can get up to about 60 miles an hour. I would probably first start around 45, and you want to ease into the brakes and stop. And you're trying to do is build up heat in the actual brake disc so that that coating that's on it starts to wear off a little bit. And at the same time, your brake pad is applying material to your brake disc, and that's causing it to fill in the tiny pores so that it creates a nice smooth surface, and the brake pads wear evenly on the brake disc, and you don't get fading or warping on the brake disc. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go out and probably about 3 times from 45 miles an hour to a stop. Now, big thing here, do not let ABS engage. ABS is the pumping of the brakes to stop it from spinning. You don't want that to happen because then you're gonna get uneven wear over the actual rotor. So slow, gradual braking, get up to about 60 miles an hour and about 3 times or so, same thing. Gradual braking all the way down to 0. That just builds up heat and allows this thing to bed in properly. And then after that, for 300 kilometers, which, 200 something miles, drive it easy, try not to slam on the brakes. And then after that, you're good to go as far as your normal braking. With that, we're gonna wrap up this video. I'm gonna have some of my beer. That's good. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments. As always, if this helps you, please like and subscribe to the channel. Please go like our page on Instagram. We are like 300 something people away from 2,000 followers. And as soon as we get 2,000 followers, I get to give away test pipes from Can Auto Performance. What are you guys waiting for? Get over there and do it. If there's anything that I forgot, as always, I'll put it in the description below, and look for our DIY on the rear brakes to follow up with this one here shortly. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys on another episode of Audi C7 Owners.